Welcome to the AI Executive Brief. I'm Stephen Forte. On today's episode, an AI model too dangerous to release is now controlled by 11 hand-picked organizations in the White House. OpenAI just spent hundreds of millions to buy a podcast. And yes, we are a podcast talking about that. And 6 independent studies converge on a single finding that should concern every CEO shipping software right now. The thread today is the illusion of control. 3 stories, 3 versions of the same gap between what we believe and what the data shows. Let's get into it. If you caught last Tuesday's episode on Mythos as a cybersecurity weapon, today we are asking a different question. Not what it can break, but who gets to decide. Here is what has happened since Tuesday. Anthropic built Mythos, a model capable of exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities in every major operating system and browser. And then they did something no AI lab has done before. They refused to release it. Instead, they created Project Glasswing, a controlled access framework that puts Mythos in the hands of exactly 11 organizations. Google, Microsoft, AWS, JP Morgan, NVIDIA, a handful of others, and the White House is involved in shaping the access terms. Now, the technical threat, we covered that. What is new is the governance question. When the most powerful AI system ever built is too dangerous for public release and the builder gets to choose which 11 entities can use it, that is not a safety framework. That is a power structure. And for the first time, the entity making that decision is not a government. It is a private company in San Francisco. Here is why this matters to you specifically. If you are running a company that depends on cybersecurity, and at this point, that is every company, the tools your adversaries might use are now gated by an access list you are not on. The illusion is that someone is in control. The reality is that control means 11 organizations and 1 administration. That is not governance. That is a guest list. Now to the main story, and then this one requires some self-awareness on my part. OpenAI acquired TBPN, the Technology Business Programming Network, for what reports describe as low hundreds of millions of dollars. TBPN is an 18-month-old tech podcast with roughly 50,000 regular viewers, $30 million a year in revenue. And I need to say this plainly, we are literally a podcast talking about an AI company buying a podcast. So let me try to be honest about what is actually happening here. Start with the numbers. TBPN's audience is small, 50,000 listeners. But the audience is not the product. The audience is the address book. TBPN's viewers are Silicon Valley insiders, founders, VCs, the people who shape the narrative around AI. OpenAI did not buy reach. They bought proximity to the people who decide what the story is. Now look at who this reports to. TBPN does not report to a content team at OpenAI. It reports to Chris Lehane. Lehane is OpenAI's chief political operative. He is the person who coined the phrase vast right-wing conspiracy for the Clinton White House. He ran the crypto super PAC Fairshake, which spent hundreds of millions on political campaigns. And he has been shaping AI deregulation policy conversations with the current administration. TBPN is now a communications asset inside a political operation. That is not an inference. That is the org chart. Here is where it gets structurally interesting. Before the acquisition closed, OpenAI killed TBPN's $30 million a year advertising business, all of it. The sole financial relationship is now OpenAI. There is no independent revenue stream to fall back on. If you want to understand leverage, understand this. TBPN's hosts went from publicly criticizing OpenAI to issuing prepared statements praising their openness to feedback. That is not a change of heart. That is a change of paycheck. And then there is the contradiction. Weeks before this deal, OpenAI told its own employees to stop pursuing side quests. They shut down Sora. They pulled back the adult chatbot project. Focus on the core product, they said, but a 3-hour daily podcast hosted by 2 people, apparently that is the core product now. The Ankler published an analysis that put it cleanly. The AI industry has optimized for capability before establishing legitimacy. TBPN is not a content acquisition. It is a legitimacy purchase. CNN went further. OpenAI is not buying a podcast. It is buying influence. Here is the broader pattern. Andreessen Horowitz launched a new media team. Founders Fund has its own content operation. Silicon Valley is systematically building its own media infrastructure, and the playbook is not subtle. One Reddit commenter distilled it to 3 steps. Fund the platforms that hollow out traditional media, build your own media team, then congratulate yourself for rebuilding the house you burned down. Here is why this matters if you run a company. The information environment you rely on to understand AI, the podcasts, the newsletters, the conferences, is increasingly funded by the companies you're trying to evaluate. When the narrator works for the subject, the narrative changes, not always visibly, but structurally. And the question you should be asking is not whether this podcast is biased. It is whether the next piece of AI coverage you read was funded by the company it covers, including, for full transparency, the one you are listening to right now. I run Build Club, where we do AI integration for mid to large sized companies. We are entirely tool agnostic, no vendor relationships, no kickbacks, no preferred platforms. Think of us as an owner's rep. We are 100% aligned with the best interest of our clients and nothing else. This podcast exists for the same reason, to cut through the noise and give you an honest read on what actually matters. I will let you decide if that changes anything. When you cannot control the narrative through technology, you buy the megaphone. That is not cynicism. That is the acquisition history. Now, the final story, and this one lands closest to your operations. 6 independent studies have converged on the same conclusion, and the conclusion is not comfortable. AI-generated code is creating a hidden quality crisis, and the people closest to it cannot see it. Start with the most rigorous study. Meter ran a randomized controlled trial, not a survey, an actual RCT, with 16 experienced open source developers across 246 real-world tasks. The developers using AI tools were 19% slower than those who were not. But here is the number that should stay with you. Those same developers believed they were 20% faster. That is a 39-point perception gap, the largest documented gap between perceived and actual AI productivity in any study to date. CodeRabbit analyzed 470 GitHub pull requests and found AI-generated code contained 1.7 times more bugs than human-written code. Logic errors were 1.75 times higher. Security vulnerabilities were 1.57 times higher. Cross-site scripting vulnerabilities specifically 2.74 times higher. The Stack Overflow Developer Survey, 49,000 respondents, found that 84% of developers now use AI coding tools, but only 29% trust the output. That is down from 40% the year before. Trust is collapsing as adoption grows. That is the opposite of every normal technology adoption curve. And here is the number that ties it together. Sonar's developer survey found that 96% of developers do not trust AI-generated code to be correct, and 48% do not verify it before committing to production. Read those two numbers together. Almost nobody trusts it. Almost half do not check it. GitClear analyzed 211 million lines of code and found that copy-paste code now exceeds refactoring for the first time in recorded software history. Refactoring, the practice of improving existing code, collapsed from 25% of code changes to under 10%. Developers are not building. They are assembling. Anthropic's own learning study found that junior developers scored 17% lower on comprehension tests when using AI assistants. They are shipping code they do not understand, and that code is becoming the foundation other code builds on. Werner Vogels, the CTO of AWS, coined a term for this: verification debt. Unlike technical debt, which engineers can see and measure, verification debt is invisible. Unverified AI outputs compound silently as they get reused downstream. AI now accounts for 42% of all committed code. By 2027, projections put it at 65%. You might think this is a developer problem, something your CTO handles. It is not. It is a balance sheet problem that has not shown up on the balance sheet yet. Here is the CEO question. Say you run a mid-market SaaS company, 80 engineers, shipping weekly. Your engineering teams are almost certainly using AI coding tools. The METR study says they believe they are faster. 6 studies say they are not. And the code quality is measurably worse. 48% are not verifying before they ship. The illusion of productivity is creating a debt that does not show up on any dashboard until something breaks. And by then it is architectural. Verification debt does not send you a notification, it sends you an outage. 3 stories. An AI too powerful to release, controlled by a guest list. A narrative too important to leave to independent media, solved by buying the narrator. And a productivity gain that 6 studies say is not real, invisible to the people closest to it. The illusion of control is not a technology problem, it is a measurement problem. And the people with the widest gap between what they believe and what the data shows are the ones closest to the technology. That is the AI Executive Brief for Monday, April 13th. I am Stephen Forte. If this was useful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I will be back Tuesday with more. Until then, stay sharp.